So welcome everybody to another webinar, Meet Success. This week our guest panelist is Bobbin, an IT business analyst. How are you going there, Bobbin?
Hi Terry.
Welcome and thank you for joining us and giving up your valuable time to share your experience.
Thank you.
If you're interested, Bobbin and I are both in Melbourne. I'm working from the OBP Australia office in Melbourne and Bobbin is joining us from home. So we'll get started. We'll come back and talk a little bit more to Bobbin in a moment. Before we do that, let's just have a look at a couple of things. For those of you who haven't attended a webinar before, you'll have a control panel in front of you. If you want to type a question, just type in type question here and click send. If you want to ask a question, you'll see a small hand icon. Okay, just click on that and your hand will come up on my monitor and that will indicate that you want to actually ask a question live. So if you do that, please make sure that your microphone is working at the other end. If we can't hear you, then I'll just move on and go back again. So at the moment, everybody is by default muted. It can't run any other way, of course. So if you want to say something, post a question anytime. So this will go for approximately 1 hour, maybe a little bit less, but feel free to post a question at any stage. If the webinar control panel is taking up too much room, simply click on the arrow in the orange box, that icon at the top left, and it will minimize to a toolbar. Then if you want to post a question, you click on the arrow again and it will expand into the full control panel. So before we do anything, let's kick off with a couple of questions, or a few questions, 3 I have, just to get an idea of who's out there, which helps Bobbin and I focus a little bit as well. So the first question is simply, where are you? If you can indicate by clicking on those options, Melbourne, regional Victoria, interstate or overseas. Okay, 60%, 80% voted, 87, 93. Nearly there. Okay, everyone's voted. Well done. I'll close that off and share the result. 80% in Melbourne, 13 interstate and 7% overseas. Okay, great. Okay, let's hide that. Another question. What is your profession? So are we money people, accounting, finance and banking, or are we IT, engineering, sciences or other? So if you could just select one of those and let me know, I'll share that result with everybody. 80%, 94% voted. A few more people to vote. Okay, 100. Let's close that off. And I'll share that result with you. 63% IT, 13% science, 19% other. Okay, so we have a lot of IT people in tonight, which is great. If you want to post questions that are of a technical nature, please feel free to do so. And if Bobbin can answer them, he will. Yeah, how much time we devote to technical matters will really depend on the audience and what you want to know. So the purpose of this conversation is for it to be useful for you. So don't be afraid to post questions. It's good if the questions, the discussion is guided by your questions. Okay, last question. Are you in Australia looking for professional work, in Australia working in your profession already, or overseas and planning to come? So just have a think about those ones. 88% voted, 95, 96% voted, a few more, and 100%. I'll close that off, share the result. Okay, so 3/4 of you are looking for work here in Australia and 1/4 of you already working in your profession in Australia. If you're in that quarter, 25%, feel free to share your experience as well. You don't have to post questions, you can post comments and we can have a look at what you've got to say there. Okay, let's move on. Oops, let's go back. So Bobbin, welcome back. Just tell us what's your job title, please.
I work as a senior business analyst.
Okay. Yeah.
In an IT, in a financial sector firm.
In the financial
That's
sector. Okay, great. So what do you do on a daily basis? I mean, I'm sure it's not the same thing every day, but can you give us a snapshot of what you do?
Yeah. So as a business analyst, my job involves creating business cases as and when there are specific customer requirements or there are requirements from the business. I work with the business to create business cases. That's the starting point of a project. And then I also work with the business to come up with the estimates for the project. So that doesn't just stop with the estimates which is concerned with the requirements, but it also involves the end-to-end estimates. So estimation is also one key part of that. In addition to that, I also work closely with the business to conduct sessions with different stakeholders, which would involve people from the IT department, the people from the business, and specifically the product owners, and with the legal and the security teams to drive the requirements elicitation function. And then in addition to that, after we gather all or elicit all the requirements, it's mostly documenting them into our business requirements document, taking it to the stakeholders back again, doing the review sessions, getting their sign-offs. These are all part of the job which I do, and it doesn't stop there. My job also involves coming up with the functional specification documents, which is specifically used by the IT department, the developers, to actually come up with their design and performing their development activities. So it's kind of like the entire gamut of what involves in the requirements space. In addition to that, there are some coordination activities as well, coordinating with different teams, making sure that the requirements, what I have documented and captured, are actually translated into specific deliverables in terms of systems.
Okay. So as a proportion, roughly, how much time would you spend with external stakeholders, clients, in requirement gathering or anything else? How much time do you spend on that sort of work compared to just being in the office working with your colleagues?
It again, it depends upon the type of project which you're working. Some of the projects where we actually need to actually go out to the clients, it involves more of client involvement at the start of the project, where we actually meet up with the clients, look at all their requirements, try to talk to them, come up with all the key high-level requirements that they have about the system, understand the pain points. So that forms the bulk of the work when we start off that project. Once we have gathered that and we formalize that as a business requirements, our interaction with the external client reduces, and then it's more like talking to the IT people, translating that into functional specification for the developers. So it depends, one, on the type of project which you're doing. The second part is which phase or which part of the project you're actually working on.
Right, okay. And would you describe it as an agile environment or a mixture of?
I've been fortunate enough to work in both. So started off as a waterfall approach when we were building out the business requirements, because it primarily involved a lot of interaction and there was less of interaction from the IT team. So once we captured what the requirements were from the customer's perspective, we went into an agile mode. The agile which we used was kind of like a Kanban board, where we had all these storyboards, and my job was to create all the storyboards, come up with all the acceptance criteria. So it was kind of like a mix of both.
Okay, good. Okay, let's move on to the next one. And when did you come to Australia, Bobbin?
So first week of September 2015. That's when I actually came.
Yep. And you chose Melbourne. Why was that?
It was not a choice. It was more that I had family already established here, and so it was a given that I chose to come to Melbourne. But apart from that, I did do some research, and mostly from the IT perspective, Melbourne and Sydney are the two key cities which have a lot of job opportunities with respect to IT. And given that I already had family here, so I chose Melbourne.
Yeah, it's great to have some connections. It does make it a little bit easier, doesn't it, when you have connections in the city?
Yes. I mean, at least for the initial part, when you're actually getting in and trying to settle down, any help is actually a great help. So, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And how long did it take you to find a work in your profession?
It took me around 3 months to get work, and I think it had more to do with the approach which I was actually taking initially, and then the approach which I took after I met you. So that actually, so the initial part was on my own, so that took a longer part. So once that approach, when I contacted you and I got to know the key aspects of what I need to concentrate on, then I think the results were faster, and I could see more results in that.
Great. Okay. A question from Kasala. Are you a BA for a specific product? And which stage of the product implementation are you on?
Yeah, I would say it's a specific. It's not really a product. It's the company where I work in. People get assigned to specific lines of business, and within that line of business, any product which actually comes up, I'm automatically assigned to that, and we work right from the stage when the product is conceptualized to the stage where we actually roll it out to the customer. So I've worked both at the conceptualization stage as well as for the rollout.
So you're involved in every stage of the process then, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right, great. So 3 months is probably about average for finding work. It depends, of course, on your experience and your industry and a range of other things. But yeah, if you can hone what you're doing, as you said before, work out what is not working and work out what you need to do, it speeds things up. That's great. And how many interviews did you have before you landed the job?
So if you break down in the type of interviews, I had a lot of phone interviews initially. And after a particular stage, after we actually changed the strategy, I had personal interviews from 3 different companies, and the current one where I'm actually working, and that was the 4th one. So you could say a lot of phone interviews, which most of which didn't actually materialize into a personal interview. But before my final interview where I got the job, I had like 3 personal interviews in addition to that.
Okay. Joydeep has a question. Regarding approach for job hunting for a new BA in Australian job market, should we concentrate on specific domain which matches our expertise, like finance or retail, etc.? Or is it okay to send applications for generic BA roles as well?
It depends upon the market you are in and what the job requirements are. What I have seen is when we have a specific skill set which is specific to an industry, and that is a very niche skill, you definitely get preference. But there are a lot of other factors as well. It's not just the domain knowledge per se. What I've understood in Australia, it's not just the domain knowledge which an employer is actually looking for. It's more like a risk assessment which an employer does in terms, and specifically if you are actually not having a local experience, it's more like the employer he has to weigh the versus the risk of actually hiring someone who doesn't have a local experience.
So this issue of no local experience, can we break this down? What do you think an employer is really concerned about when this is a consideration? What does it mean, this no local experience? What's the real thing that's stopping them employing?
So I've not seen this question arise specifically from the direct employers, because the direct employers are pretty open in terms of having varied experiences and looking at different experience coming into the team. What I've seen is this local experience plays out more from the recruiter's perspective, where I believe there are a lot of incentives for them to actually look at local experience, because they believe that that improves the chances of their candidates getting that particular job. So it kind of like weighs very heavily on the recruiter's mind. But as far as the direct employers are concerned, I think they look more at what your skills are, whether those skills are basically transferable to the job which they are looking at. And most importantly, what I have felt is they look at cultural fit, whether you actually fit into their cultural environment or not. And that is more key for direct employers vis-a-vis the recruiters.
Yeah, good advice. Yeah, that's totally true from my perspective as well. Just picking up on what you said about the recruiters and their financial incentive to win the commission, and they feel like they have a better chance of doing that with a local prospect is true. I think the other aspect, Joydeep, is that often recruiters don't really understand your resume, and they have to take a bit of a punt, a bit of a guess sometimes as well, where if you're talking directly to an employer, there'll be a technical person there reading your resume, so somebody who does your job. And it's far easier for them to make an assessment about your suitability than somebody who doesn't really understand your profession. So there are several aspects in dealing with recruiters. We might come back to that a little bit later, but as Bobbin said, if you can speak directly to employers, you'll have a far better strike rate generally. So what avenues did you take before, for example, meeting me, and also afterwards? We've got recruiters, direct application for advertised jobs, or contacting personnel in companies before jobs were advertised. Just tell us a little bit about your job-seeking approach, Bobbin.
Yeah, sure. So when I came in, there were a lot of opportunities which were coming up. And primarily when I'm saying coming up, I actually looked at Seek and a couple of the other job websites which actually come up with all these different job applications. So initially, because one thing which you said well is that applications which the recruiters actually put on those job websites, they're very generic. I mean, if you look at them at one glance, you will see that you will meet almost 80 to 90% of the criteria what they have actually put out as a requirement for the job. But when it actually comes to talking to them, they actually what they want is they're looking at different aspects, and they're trying to get more of your resumes with them so that they can actually build up some kind of a resume list with them. So when I started my job hunt, I did a lot of like sending out scores of applications based on the different sites which I saw had all these different job applications for the business analyst. That was the primary route which I did, but that was not really successful in the first instance. I did reach out a couple of direct applications, and that primarily was doing some bit of a research as to the different companies which I had actually worked earlier. I did try to contact them and get some details around different job. So primarily it was either the recruiter or the direct application.
Okay.
I didn't go through this expression of interest to direct employers. I didn't try that route.
Okay. From memory, I think once you made some adjustments to your resume and you started to apply directly, there was quite a bit of interest in your skill set, yeah?
Yeah, and I think, yeah, that has a lot, again, to do with what you mentioned, where you had the people who had the technical skills and who were actually in that particular job as a business analyst or as a business analyst manager, looking at the specific profile and looking at the different projects which I had done. They were much more comfortable interviewing me rather than a recruiter. So that was the major advantage which I think I had when I went direct to the employers.
Okay. Kasala has another question. How did you convince the employer during the interview that you are the right person for the job?
The way in which you can convince, and I mean it will vary person to person. It's more like understanding what exactly the requirements are, and you have to do a lot of research on that particular company and try and understand what exactly are they looking for. That research will actually tell you whether what approach you need to take. When your initial phone interview takes place, that's a good avenue to actually start, because mostly what I have seen is it is mostly, even if it is a direct application, you have people from the HR department calling you. So if you ask specific questions around the job, like what kind of a job it is, what are you actually looking for from a prospective candidate, you will get to know what specific skill sets and what skills they are actually looking for. So it's more a matter of playing up the skills which they are looking for in that job, which would actually weigh a lot in your favor when they are actually conducting the personal interview.
Okay. Can I just pick up on a couple of things you've said there? Really excellent advice. So anybody listening, I can't endorse what Bobbin has said anymore. He's hit the nail on the head, so to speak. First of all, the telephone interview, any interaction you have with a prospective employer is an interview. So it may not be a scheduled one. If it's an informal conversation, they will take notes. So your presentation on the phone is critical. Are you clear? Are you speaking slowly and in a professional manner? All of this is really important. Even if it is only to HR, that information is being passed on to hiring managers. Just back on your resume, what specific skills within your resume do you think were attractive to the employers who granted you an interview?
I think it's more like for specific to a business analyst, the skills which they actually look for is whether you have varied experience in different type of methodologies. What is how relevant are your projects to their industry? Whether you have actually worked very closely with using different tools which are already in the particular company might be using within their workplace. These are some of the key things which I believe the companies do look at. For example, whether you have worked on STL, waterfall, SDLC, or whether is it an agile methodology, what are the different agile methodologies you have worked on, what are the different tools you have used, if you have any certification. If you don't have any certification, you have to be prepared with a valid answer which you can actually give, because a lot of these companies also want to be reassured that you have taken some industry certification which proves what you have on your resume.
Okay, so just back to the, Kasala has another question about methodology and tools. So methodology, we're talking about the software development lifecycle, whether it's agile or waterfall, correct?
Yes.
And tools, can you be more specific here? What are we talking about?
So tools in terms of Jira. So Jira is one of the tools which a lot of the companies actually use
That's
while they are.
Jira, J-I-R-A, yep.
That's right.
Yep.
So a tool which is primarily used for both in terms of writing all the requirements as well as also for the testing purpose. So it's kind of like a versatile tool which is used, and they also look at how many different tools you have worked, because I think it gives them an indication of how fast you can actually learn, because some of the companies might be using a different tool. So it's basically looking at how vast your experience is and how quickly you can actually um, learn a tool, given that you are given an opportunity to work in that organization.
Yeah, sure. I suppose that they get a lot of that from your CV, or your resume, but even more important is your ability to articulate that, to explain the projects during the interview process. They need to see that you sound like the person in your resume, correct?
That's right, and one of the strategies which I adopted was to kind of like look at some of the key things in different tools which I have done, which is unique to that tool, and try and relate how you can actually achieve that within the other tool. What that means is, if that unique thing which you're talking about, the tool, would be only known by persons who have actually worked on that tool. So that's one good way of letting them know that you have actually worked on that tool.
Yeah, absolutely. And just remember, I'll give you one of the OBP Australia tips and secrets here is that you need to practice saying what you're going to say. It's one thing to have the knowledge up here. It's a different skill to produce the language. So
That's right.
back to being convincing at the interview, all the employer has to go by is what you say. They can't get inside your head, and not enough people do the practice that's required, particularly if you find it difficult to articulate what it is you know, what projects you've worked on, explaining the tools, explaining problems you've had, and so on. So that practice is really valuable, and we run sessions specifically on that as part of the service. Joydeep has a question. For the direct applications, what do you think is the correct approach? Like networking in LinkedIn with people working in similar profession, or any other approach? So this is not actually an advertised application, I'm guessing here. It's more trying to make contact with the right personnel within companies. Do you have any suggestions for doing this? You said you didn't do a lot of this, but do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I didn't actually put in a lot of applications, but there is another added advantage when you actually do a lot of networking with people in your profession within Australia. The biggest advantage is you kind of like you can understand at what level or what proficiency your fellow professionals are actually at, and that gives you either a confidence that you can actually perform to that level, or it would also give you an indication of what skills you need to actually, how you need to upskill, and what skills you need to upskill to come up to that level. So I did a couple of things. One was meetups. I did register on a couple of meetups. I did attend a couple of sessions just to get to know the level of the proficiency and what skills the professionals in my line of business or my job have. And then I did take up my membership in IIBA. IIBA has a Melbourne chapter, and the Melbourne chapter of IIBA conducts a lot of seminars. They call in professionals, and you have a big gathering of business analysts. And that's one way where you can actually network and come into contact with different people. Another opportunity is you can actually, Melbourne chapter of IIBA, they look for a lot of volunteer opportunities, people who can actually come up and volunteer and help them with the events. That's another way of actually developing your networking skills and also coming into contact with people who can actually, if you do well and if they like you, they could actually give you insight into if any job opportunities are coming up in the companies they're working in.
Yeah. So that conversation with your peers is critical, and so that's a really good advice you're giving there, Bobbin. As you said before, to measure, where you are, to calibrate your approach, and I find that our clients who have a deeper understanding of their industry here, and those who are not afraid to talk about their job and what's current and so on, are the ones that tend to find work more quickly as well. So sometimes networking is a slow burn. It doesn't always happen very quickly, and it's not a matter of going up to somebody and saying, have you got a job for me? It's more that general talk about your profession, and it does reap rewards. Okay. Do you have any other advice, just general advice about seeking a job in Australia? Doesn't have to be about BA roles, but just anything you've come across.
Yeah, I mean, one important key thing is you have to be persistent. I mean, you always have to be positive when you are doing a job seeking. It's not a really easy task, so you have to be always positive, and you have to be persistent. You cannot let go, because the more you persist with, and the more you want to you look out for opportunities, you have a better chance of actually getting a good job.
Yeah, good advice. I think many people come extremely optimistic hearing about the skills shortage, particularly in IT, and they get here and see that it's a lot tougher than they had expected. But you need to be persistent, and it takes courage and support. Sometimes it's good if you've got people around you who can encourage you to keep going as well. Did you need to do a survival job outside of your profession to stay alive, basically?
No, I didn't have to do it.
Okay, that's good. I find people who do need to do that, it can sometimes impinge on their ability to look for work. Of course, it's necessary.
Yeah,
Yep.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons why I didn't try it, because it could actually on whether how I was planning to look at different jobs. So that was one of the key reasons why I didn't actually do a survival job.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great decision you made, and it's excellent if you can do that, focus on what you're trying to achieve. Okay, think about the first year in Australia. You're still sort of in that at the moment. Do you have any things that you've learnt in this time? It could be about culture, the industry, the country, anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, culture-wise, I was pleasantly surprised that Australia is multicultural. Actually find people from different parts of the world, and that's really a good thing, because you don't stick out as an odd man out. That's a really comforting thing when you come to Australia. That is the first part. Second part is something unique which I have found is a lot of people here in Melbourne wear black. I don't know what, either it be suit or pant. I don't know if they have, I think they have a great liking for everything which is black. And the third thing which I have seen is that the weather changes in Melbourne 4 times a day. So it's always good advice to carry an umbrella with you, because you never know. And you always have to invest in umbrellas, because you never know when your umbrella can get broken.
Yes, I was in Sri Lanka in January, and I brought 4 umbrellas home.
Oh, wow.
I've never seen rain like it rained in Sri Lanka when I was there, but they make great umbrellas in Sri Lanka. They're built to last, I tell you. They're such good quality. That's why I brought them home. Interesting you picked up on the black aspect. You may not know, but Sydney, people who live in Sydney-siders often laugh about people wearing black in Melbourne. So you're right. You have picked up on that trend. It's true. Okay. People talk about fitting in. How are you going there? Do you feel like you fit in Australia? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
I mean, yeah, I mean, fitting in terms of, I mean, we should actually break it down. I mean, fitting in terms of whether it is your social life, that is something different. We have to find common ground. I mean, ultimately we have made a decision that we are going to settle down in Australia, and if we think there are certain adjustments that we need to make, then it's absolutely necessary we need to make that. So that's one part. But professionally, fitting in also means that when you are actually attending office and you are in meetings, you're talking to different people, they value your opinion, and they actually are interested in learning more about your views and your opinion. That is very key, and I think I have been fortunate enough that in the company.
I think we've lost you there. Can you just try to, yeah, we might be able to get you back. I can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, professionally, yes. Professionally, it's very important that we speak up. That's one aspect which you said. And the second aspect is when you give your opinion and you back it up with your work, people do start to get around you, understand you better, and they start to value your opinion. So that's fitting in the professional world. And in addition to that, you have to make that extra effort when you are coming into Australia to meet around with people. People are friendly in office. It's just that you need to get up from your seat and you need to go and talk to people, and people are really friendly and helpful. And they, if you have any issues or problems, or if you have any questions, people definitely are ready to help you out.
So when you talk about that extra effort, I mean, clearly there are cultural differences, and finding that common ground is an extra effort, and it can be outside your comfort zone sometimes too, correct?
Definitely. I mean, but at the same time, if it is against your conviction or your principle, I would say that you definitely have you are at a freedom and you are at a liberty to say no to certain aspects which you don't like. But if you think that that particular change, which can actually get you talking to different people, understanding viewpoints, and getting accepted into a crowd, if it doesn't impinge on your either your conviction or your principles, then I think it's a good that you can actually, if you can make that change, that it would help you fit into a lot of different situations.
Sure. Kasala has a really interesting question here, asking the job you were hired for and the job you do now, are they the same? I think what he's alluding to here is sometimes people are hired for a specific position description, and once you get in the company, it changes a bit, and they need you for other things and so
on. So I wouldn't say that it is exactly 100% what I was doing. I am definitely doing what I was hired for, but I've also been given certain additional responsibilities, which in a traditional sense a business analyst may not do. But I consider it more as a learning opportunity because that gives you a diverse experience, a different kind of experience, which would help you develop your skills as well as your resume. So that's something which I think I have been fortunate enough to have.
I think in any organization we need to operate as a team anyway, and you're always going to be called on to do things that aren't a perfect fit for your job description, but that flexibility is important. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and when we are working in a project environment, when you have deadlines and you have milestones, a lot of the times you cannot depend on, or you cannot get a person who can actually do that job. Then a lot of the time you have to step up and you have to take up that additional responsibility.
Yeah.
So that's very important. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Some of the tough things. What's been the most difficult aspect of immigration, do you think, for you, Bobbin?
Oh, difficult thing. Right from the time getting a house on rent, getting a driver license. I mean, these are some of the things which we actually should sort out when we actually land, because the moment you get into the thick of job hunt, you actually lose out on all these things because then you're not in a mental frame to actually follow up on those things. But it's not just the job hunt, but I think it's basically the settling down, which takes a lot of effort, and you need a lot of help to do all these activities.
The practicalities can be very time consuming. I know people who have children have to find schools, the whole medical process, things don't always go well. Expect the unexpected is generally. Okay, how do you manage your relationships with your supervisors, peers and colleagues? So we're going to come to this question in a moment, but Kasala has asked it. How do you find that? And maybe compare it to what you're used to as well, so that whole difference in managerial approach.
Yeah, I mean, one thing which I have seen work well for me is being honest in your communication. You have to be very open with your managers and with your peers. That actually helps iron out a lot of the issues. And the second thing is you need to actually interact a lot with them to develop your relationship, because you would have already well-established relationships within the team or within the company which you're actually going to. It's more like you have to break that ice to actually get into that, and there it's more like the more you interact, the more you discuss, the more you talk to people, you can actually have a better relationship. As far as relationship with your manager is concerned, what I have felt is being honest, being open, and always having a communication about everything, everything in the sense professional issues or professional things which you're actually working on. You should always have an open communication with your manager, which actually helps you a lot. I mean, but again, this depends upon how office to office, culture to culture. So I'm just sharing my experience, but it could be different for others.
Yeah, no, good advice, excellent advice. Just jumping back to the interview again, was it similar to what you had experienced overseas, or how was it different in Australia? How would you describe the process of being interviewed?
Oh, there are a lot of stages. The one difference which I could find was there were like one company had like 4 stages of interview. It started off with a phone. The second stage was personal interview, where they kind of like discussed with you whether they wanted to understand whether you actually culturally fit into that company. Then they also had an analytical test where you actually were given a piece of paper with a lot of questions, and you had to do numerical ability, you had to do logical, and all these different analytical questions you had to actually answer. And once you cleared that stage, the second step was more like a technical discussion, where you had a discussion directly with the hiring manager, where you talked about your work experience, you talked about different scenarios. You had to give concrete examples of how you actually overcome certain work situations or certain situations. So that was the third stage, and there was one another stage where I had to actually do a real case study, which involved different aspects of the job. For example, for me, it was like I was given a particular scenario, and I was asked to conduct a requirement elicitation session, and in addition to that, I was also asked to document and prepare high-level requirements documents. So it kind of like varies companies to company. Another company which I actually had, it had like 3 stages of interview, and the first stage was again phone. The second was mostly a discussion with the HR manager, again mostly trying to understand how my communication skill is, how do I fit in with the culture, and the third one was with the business head of that unit where the job was requested for. So there were like 3 stages. So mostly what I've seen is like these are the 3 stages where you actually have to go through that interview process.
Yeah, that's quite a process, and it's probably largely because of the seniority of the role as well. So some junior roles may not have such an extensive process, but yeah, if you pass that, you've done well. So good work. Are you with a small, medium, or large employer?
I would say it's between medium and large, the size of the current employer
Yep.
which I'm working on.
Okay. What do you find are the challenges in your job? So what's tough, most difficult part?
So one of the key items in my job is to kind of like elicit the requirements. You have to talk to different stakeholders, people who are in business, people who are in IT, and when you talk about requirements, you have to model your conversation and responses in such a way that it is easier for them to understand. Discussing a requirement session with a large group of people is always difficult when you have people with strong opinions. Bring them onto a consensus, or because IT is mostly driven by timelines and cost, business are mostly driven by the key requirements, what they want in the product features. So bringing them onto a table and getting a common consensus, a common ground is one difficult aspect of what I do. And then in addition to that, sorry.
Go ahead, sorry.
Finding time with all these people. A lot of the time what I have seen is when you have multiple stakeholders, one of the other stakeholder would be on leave. So finding out the correct time where you can actually get everyone together and get their buy-in on any requirement or any requirements. That's a lot of challenge currently in my job.
Okay, great. So we've got about 5 or 10 minutes left. If you have any questions, I suggest you post them now because we're nearly done. Just moving on a little bit more. What's the most rewarding aspect of your job?
I would say if you are actually working on like a product which was conceptualized, right from the conceptualization to the rollout, the most rewarding part is the requirements which you have written, actually seeing them as a live demo or as a product which in front of your eyes and looking at it. At the end of the day, that's the most rewarding part. Yeah, that's what I would say is what I enjoy the most.
Do you celebrate completion of a project, or is it just straight on to the next one? Does your supervisor commend you, or is there any discussion about how things went?
Yeah, we do have a post-mortem, but we also have like media reviews. So it's like a constant feedback which I have with my manager. So we have like every 2 weeks we have a one-on-one. We kind of like discuss what went wrong, what went right. And one of the key responsibility of the manager before a one-on-one is to actually talk to all the different stakeholders that I work with and gather feedback and share with me what the feedback is and whether I need to improve on something. So it's mostly like there is a separate feedback process which already happens. But at the same time, I think we would have some celebration at the end of the project because the project which I've been working on that has been on the floor for quite a long time. So hopefully, once we complete that, we would have a celebration.
Yeah, it's important to celebrate an achievement, I think, especially when a lot of hard work has gone into it. So Joydeep has one. Is there a lot of stress on technical aspects of BA roles in the interview, like questions from BPMN, UML, use case stories, and similar process methodologies? Getting back to the technical part, how deeply did they dig on the technical side of things?
It depends upon, again, the job profile which you're actually applying for. If they actually look for BPMN, if they look for process modeling, they would definitely call that out in the process thing. But anyway, BPMN is more like, I believe it's becoming an industry standard, so it's really a good skill to have as a business analyst. as far as user stories are concerned, again, that is very specific to the role. If you are actually, it's a good skill to have, specifically if you are going to work on a agile project. It's always useful that you have that skill. So so the way in which they test out is, it's not like asking you specific questions on the technical aspects. It's more like scenario driven. They would actually ask a specific problem and they would say, how did you overcome that? And it's you have to rely on your experience, or you have to rely on the past experiences to actually answer them.
Mm. And in fact, two professionals from the same industry, I mean, if you're being interviewed by someone, it doesn't actually take them that long to understand your depth of knowledge. When two people are from the same field, everything you say, people can gauge how deep you understand by the examples you give and what you say. It might appear to be naive, or it might be profound. So do you agree that when two people from the same field are talking, the communication is a lot clearer?
That's true, and we have to be very careful about what we are actually speaking about. If we don't have a real experience, or we don't have the depth of knowledge which is required, and if it is one of the key requirements for that job, then we should be very careful in actually presenting that during the...
That's right, because the bottom line is you can't fake it. You can't fool somebody who understands what you're talking about. So you can with a recruiter. I mean, you could just rattle off as many acronyms and jargon, but when you're talking to a peer, it's impossible. So yeah, just stay truthful and give good examples. Okay, we're nearly at the end, so if anybody has another question, feel free to ask now. We'll probably take one more if there's time. I think we've covered up maybe the skill development and professional development. How often are you required to learn new skills? Is it an ongoing thing? Do you get formal training? Are you just expected to acquire these new skills? How does it work?
Again, this depends upon the company which you're working in. If the company which you're working in is consulting, they require that you upskill frequently, so that they can you can be put in different roles with different companies. If you are actually an in-house, it might be a bit slow, because they would be very keen on using the software or the tools which they already have, and bigger companies normally have like pretty expensive tools and they don't want to actually change. But I feel it's very important that even if you get into a big company where the change is not that often, it's always important that you upskill, you keep yourself up to date, and that's where you actually, one of these meetups or networking or attending these seminars from IIBA and reading up material is very helpful, because then that actually increases your sellability in the market.
Right. Okay, let's have one more question and we'll finish up for this evening. So Arash has asked, did you face any resistance from colleagues or team members, for example, sharing information, etc., when you started your job?
Yeah, I mean, it actually, you have to work a lot on getting information. So that's one of the aspect, which is, so you asked, one of the key questions was like challenges. So I would say yes, gaining that domain experience, it takes a bit of effort. And one of the key aspects is, how do you actually approach your coworkers or people who are in different departments and try to get that out from them. A lot of the time what happens is people are reluctant to let go of the information which they might only be privy to, and a lot of the time you need to get either the project managers or others involved so that you can actually get that information.
So this is where your soft skills come into play, yeah? Where
That's right.
Talking to people and making sure you're going through the right channels and
That's right.
understanding whose role it is to do different things, yeah? Okay, we might finish up there. Just before I say thanks to Bobbin, let's just talk about next week. We have our second last session. Next week we have Umesh coming to talk, who's a network engineer from the telco industry. So same time, back here at 8 o'clock next Thursday, 8 o'clock Melbourne time. And if anybody has any inquiries about OBP Australia, feel free to go to the website and complete an inquiry form, or send me an email, give me a call, whatever your preference is. So thank you very much, Bobbin, for giving up your valuable time and sharing your pearls of wisdom, and it's been very informative, and I'm sure everybody has got a lot out of this session. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you for having me.
No problems. Okay, we'll be back for another one, so stay tuned and good night, everybody. Sleep well.